We all know what time of year it is, and I've always felt that there's no better way to get prepped for a holiday than to experience some games that align with its general mood. There are actually several times for this throughout the year, as I've always found the best time to play a game like Skyrim to be around Christmas, and I'll even replay something like The Witcher in the spring to prepare myself for the impending summer. Enjoying titles that align with the season is just something I like to do if I'm being honest, and I've always found that I can derive a somewhat euphoric feeling of nostalgia from just experiencing media that reminds me of the season I used to look forward to. However, with this being said, I've always preferred the games that I played during October. Call me sentimental, but I consistently find myself feeling quite melancholic around this time of year specifically, and experiencing media which gets me in that Halloween mindset always found a way to perfectly add to the tone and enjoyment of this season. Now, I'll admit that I'm somewhat of a sucker for horror as a genre. So, shockingly, this has absolutely contributed to the soft spot I have for this holiday. Thematically speaking, the twisted and surreal nature of this medium can create worlds and narratives which are just extremely compelling in a way where other genres aren't for me. And sure, there can be a lot of some really not so great content within the horror genre. But while this can be the case, I would also gladly trudge through 5 Baldi's basics if it meant that I got the chance to play a Dead Space level of game down the road. So, for this video, let's hope that the game I want to talk about reaches that higher tier of horror game, and not the Baldi's one, as I want to share my experience with this kind of title to celebrate the season. Okay? After having given some context, I think I can start to dive into the point of this video. I have an absurdly long backlog at this point, and if I'm being honest, it's one which I am nowhere near even getting close to completing. It's actually gotten to be such a massive problem that I went as far as to create this whole series to discuss my time going through these games. And sadly, this has still hardly made a dent in the list of titles I still want to experience. Games just get added to that list a hell of a lot faster than I can play them, and I thought that this episode could act as another small effort to chip away at this seemingly Herculean task. On top of this, for Halloween specifically, I wanted to go through a game that not only belongs to one of my favorite genres, but is also a game created by one of my favorite studios. Honestly, I've kind of been holding off on playing this title for a while now, with this video specifically in mind. So, I really hope it's been worth the wait. The game I want to talk about is Amnesia the Bunker, and while I'm writing this segment of the video, I actually still haven't experienced the game yet. All I currently know is that I love Frictional as a studio, and I'm quite excited to give the title a shot. The first 2 games I owned on Steam were the mainline Penumbra titles, and trust me, the first Amnesia was purchased not too long after. I've heard some great things about this entry, and I really want to touch base to see what Frictional Games, the developer of this series, has been up to. So, with all this being said, I think that this video has been a long time coming, and it's about time to jump straight into the game at this point. As to be honest, I'm just excited as hell to play it. Okay, I have now completed Amnesia the Bunker, and I can very safely say that this game is absolutely one of the best experiences Frictional has ever produced. And to be honest, there are several reasons for why this is the case. This entry in the series has somehow found a way to recapture the classic and unique feeling of Frictional's older titles while combining it with some of the more advanced systems present in a game like Alien Isolation. It's actually pretty shocking, but this game feels extremely different from pretty much every other Amnesia title. Well, until some of its later segments. But with this being said, I absolutely believe that every single innovation made in this game was necessary for the future success of Frictional as a studio. It's incredible how many issues present within their older titles they addressed in this one game, and it's even to the point where it would be difficult to go back to some of their classic experiences in the future. So, why is this the case? Well, for those who may be a little bit less familiar with Frictional as a studio, I think I'll need to take a minute or two to describe exactly what makes their games different and more compelling than almost all other horror titles. I'll admit that it can be kind of tough to explain how Frictional doesn't really make games similar to any other horror experience you may see on Steam. Like, Amnesia the Dark Descent is absolutely one of the best horror titles ever made. This is a fact. But to a certain extent, a person coming in without any perspective as to how this genre works could very easily perceive it to be a run-of-the-mill horror game that's seemingly gassed up for no apparent reason by fans of the genre. I mean, like, I'm watching the trailer for it right now, and there doesn't necessarily seem to be anything too special about it. What I'll say is that Frictional does a really great job adding a certain level of physicality to their games. The other titles just don't. The systems at play within these experiences have always been designed in a manner which try to inhibit the player in a very physical sense. Do you want to open a door? Well, this won't be a simple button click or a keybind, but a whole arm swing with your mouse just to open it about this much. and this applies to pretty much everything you need to interact with in these games. Do you need to spin a wheel to open something or pick up an object? Well, the weight of each item directly impacts the player's movement, and the wheel is just a nightmare to interact with if I'm being completely honest. To an outsider, this may sound annoying or kinda tedious, but to be honest, that's kind of the point. It's incredibly stressful to interact with objects in these games. Like, imagine having to clear some debris in order to get to a safe zone while some sort of ghoul is chasing you from across the map, or picture yourself panicking while trying to slam a door behind you in some small effort to slow down the thing that's chasing the player. These actions really should be annoying and tedious, but they just aren't. They actually add a lot to the experience. These games are always at their best when you find yourself needing to do some small task with seemingly no time to actually do it. It gets you in that fight or flight mode pretty damn quick, and this is the case for pretty much every single Frictional game you can think of. You can absolutely tell that their earlier experiences were entirely designed around the source engine, as most other horror games can't even come close to competing with the interactability factor present in these titles. Meanwhile, Amnesia is halfway to feeling like a spiritual successor to Half-Life 2 through its environmental interaction mechanics and physics sandbox, or maybe a spookified version of it. With this being said, I have to say that historically speaking, the impact of these ass-clenching moments have always been slightly diminished by the somewhat simple enemy design present within these games. Frictional's previous titles have been criticized for having little to no interactions with the monsters outside of some scripted set-piece moments, and with this, the narrative and tone of these titles have been the primary means through which the games frighten the player after they have come to this realization. Actually, the games have always been at their most tense when they implant the idea of a threat coming out, but much less so when the monster actually presents itself. This is kind of where Amnesia the Bunker differs, and I'd actually also say that it's where it excels. To be honest, I think that this entry will somewhat act as the turning point for the studio. Each new game from Frictional seemingly builds up their toolset in some new and interesting way, as something like Soma acted as their foray into a more character-driven experience, while Amnesia Rebirth revolutionized Frictional's approach to both the art direction and graphical fidelity of their games. It's almost like every individual entry acts as a way for them to innovate their design process in a way that will carry on for future titles. And if this is the case, then the Bunker will act as Frictional's attempt to revamp their enemy AI system and level design. And to be honest, these are both things which have desperately needed overhauls after seeing where Rebirth both succeeded and failed. The Bunker found a way to accomplish this, while also keeping the thematic intrigue which has made all of their previous work so good. To somewhat debrief you on the setting of this game, you're a French soldier during World War I who has almost completely forgotten the last 2 weeks of the war due to a serious head injury. When you actually wake up from your temporary coma, your character finds themselves stuck in an underground bunker on one of the fronts of the First World War. You slowly start to get your bearings, you see some unsettling shit, but then the game really starts, as you eventually find yourself trapped in a very small region with a very murderous monster. This is relatively simple in concept, but the monster makes things so much more complicated than they sound. It waits, listens, and hunts for you at pretty much all moments within this experience. Almost every single time you need to do something, you have to evaluate if it will be loud enough to alert the beast to your presence. And this mechanic gives you an incredibly strong feeling of impending doom almost every single time you decide to leave the safe area of this game. The player will constantly feel like they're walking on the thinnest of eggshells in order to stay alive, and it makes every hour of this game feel as if it were too. The only thing that allows for it to be at all playable is the light. The light produced by this flimsy generator pretty much acts as the only barrier between you and the monster, as the thing deters the beast from coming out of the walls and hunting you freely. With this, you better make sure you're stocked up on gasoline, or else your survival chances will happen to go down exponentially. However, this isn't to say that the light acts as a complete shield between you and the monster, as if you find a way to make enough noise, the thing will come out to hunt your ass regardless. But the light at least allows for you to build up enough courage to leave the storage area. Each time you fill up the generator with gas, you get an extra 2 ticks on this extremely subjective gauge that's supposed to represent the time until it's empty. And my god, this compounds with the horror already present in the game to make an incredibly stressful experience. If you aren't worrying about the monster actively hunting you down, then you're absolutely going to be concerned about the time you have left protected by the light, because if it turns off, the game is like 5 times more unplayable. The Bunker proved to be horrific in a way that almost no other title is. And I actually think that the only game which could be compared to it at all is its primary influence, Alien Isolation. I actually think that this game is for the most part better than Alien. While the initial hurdle of both games is actually building up the courage to even play the damn thing, the Bunker evolves in a way that feels a lot more like a Metroidvania game than Alien does. Like Alien, for all of its extremely non-linear AI systems, is funnily enough quite a linear game. And when you're backtracking through an area in that experience, it can start to feel a lot more annoying due to the repetitive nature of it. Amnesia the Bunker uses an open area design to allow the player much more freedom in how they decide to tackle each objective. Also, the save system in the bunker is just exponentially better than that from Alien. This culminates to allow for a death in this game to not feel like a hard reset, but more of an opportunity for you to actually learn the monster and figure out new tricks to avoid it or prevent it from even entering the map at all. There are so many ways to tackle each obstacle in this game, and with the smaller map, it means that backtracking will never really be a problem. Actually, when you start to become more knowledgeable of the map and the monster's habits, you almost feel completely in control of the situation in a way that feels extremely addicting to take advantage of. Honestly, by a certain point in this game, you're stunting on it. But there are still some other obstacles to keep you on your toes. This game's non-linearity extends beyond the reach of just its enemy AI, as the map itself is pretty much as dynamic as the beast which lives in it. There are actually several ways for you to overcome each physical obstacle on top of the ones presented by the monster itself, and this makes the game feel like this massive interactive puzzle through its design. Now let me propose a hypothetical situation. You find a bunch of rats surrounding a corpse that you need to investigate. Are you going to walk by them like this and allow them to give you the Black Death? Probably not. Now, if you want to safely navigate through them, you can light a fire, blow them up, or even feed them some rotten chunks of what is maybe food, if that's what you want to do. It's your choice. And this same kind of thing goes for the doors, the locks, the puzzles, and the shortcuts on top of the monster itself. There are several ways to navigate through this game, and on repeat playthroughs, the situation changes, and not all of these solutions will be available to you. This is especially the case if you decide to alter some of the settings for your New Game Plus run. This is why the game is so fun to replay. It's addicting to learn how the beast works, and on top of this, it's addicting to memorize the map and find new ways to approach each obstacle. Honestly though, the bunker itself is incredibly small, especially when comparing it to the play space present in previous games from this same developer. However, in my eyes, this is almost preferable, as even though this is area-wise the smallest region they've ever designed, it's also hands down the most intelligent and best area from any of their games. Now, to make sure you don't blow through this relatively small map in like 4 seconds, the game restricts the number of items you can carry at one time, somewhat like your typical survival horror experience. This means that if you find too many resources on your expedition or require a key to open a door, you will have to make some tough decisions over whether or not you need to head back to your depot or drop some items on the ground. This mechanic also restricts you from taking all of your items at once to speed through every obstacle that this game throws at you. This mechanic alone makes a game which demands a lot more difficult decisions from the player than previous titles. Honestly, it's due to all these new mechanics that I feel this game is very easy to pitch to somebody, even if they've never played one of Frictional's experiences before. It's extremely focused in both its scope and scale, and you need no real prior knowledge of this series to hop in. On top of this, the game is short, extremely horrifying, and incredibly compelling from a narrative front until almost the very end. Honestly, the ending is good, but probably the least adventurous part of this experience when investigating the developer who made it. But, due to the game's relative brevity, an unadventurous final section doesn't bother me at all due to the intent of this game. Actually, I've seen a lot of people complain about the bunker's smaller scope, and it's probably the most common critique of this game. Some people believe that this experience doesn't feel nearly as complete relative to Frictional's other titles. And to be honest, I absolutely disagree with this sentiment entirely. Sure, this game is like an hour or so shorter than some of their previous titles, but it's also replayable unlike pretty much all of their previous titles. No other game of theirs has even come close to making me want to run it back immediately after beating it, but this game did. And if that isn't a testament to this title's quality, then I don't know what possibly could be. One thing I will say though, is that while the more focused scope of this game did create some amazing and unique moments, it also felt as if some of the features which made their older titles so good are somewhat missing in this experience. The level design of this title is smarter, and honestly, a lot better while still carrying that thick atmosphere present in the older games. But I'll also say that it's a lot less adventurous of a setting than many of this game's predecessors. In The Dark Descent, you get some crazy moments and set pieces inside Brennenburg Castle, many of which involving several diverse and creative enemies that elevated the tone present in the game itself. Amnesia the Bunker only has one real enemy, excluding the rats. This isn't necessarily a problem, but it is a limitation of this game's smaller and more refined scope. Sure, while the bunker is far and away one of the most consistent Frictional games released, I still find myself missing some of that diversity which made their older titles feel so high budget and unique relative to pretty much every other horror experience on the market. This is why I stated earlier that this game is one of the best Frictional experiences. As while it is the scariest, and probably the most consistent quality-wise, it's also missing just a tad of that magic which made their older titles so special. However, what I'm going to say now is that I don't really see this as a bad thing, and this fact alone kind of makes me incredibly excited for the future of Frictional games. If they can somehow find a way to mix the elements from both the Bunker's AI and level design with the more diverse locales present in their other titles, possibly through a string of smaller environments like the Bunker with a handful of monsters, I think that could pretty much lead to the perfect Frictional experience. This is why I'm in love with this title despite a few of its shortcomings, as even though it's definitely not a flawless experience, it's far and away one of their most interesting games, and it definitely makes me extremely excited for the future of this studio. Honestly, this title kinda just feels like Frictional being at the top of their game over 15 years after they came out on the scene. And it's a massive feat for them that they were able to somehow deviate this far from their classics while still coming out with something that feels just as cutting edge and exciting as the first Amnesia game. It's just such a massive victory lap for the studio. And their continued support of this game through regular updates and mod support just proves to me that they're truly one of the best horror-specific game devs out there. I'm incredibly excited for their next title, and hopefully I get the chance to talk about it on here soon enough. Frictional has truly solidified itself as one of the best devs out there, and it will continue to be one of my personal favorite studios for the foreseeable future. At this point, I think it's time for me to thank everybody who's been watching this video. I have done nothing but think about this game for the past month or so, and I hope that me discussing it has somewhat motivated you to sit down and actually play it. Funnily enough, I actually originally intended to have another video come out right before this one, but due to this game's shockingly firm grasp on me, it just didn't work out. I'm gonna be on here talking about Dark Souls again in a few weeks, so if you want to hear some more of my rants or are just interested in listening to me being conflicted on Dark Souls 2 for about a half an hour, consider subscribing. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great Halloween.